Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this webinar with regards to experience design. Really looking forward to this subject, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Phil Jones. I'm Global Client Director for Havwoods, Havwoods being a wood flooring supplier. And my colleague, we've got Lincoln Gibson, who is the, well, Lincoln, I'm going to let you introduce yourself, actually, thinking about it, dealing with the Ruutu carpet tiles and the Plus Floor LVT.
Thank you, Phil. No, also, likewise, very excited to join this panel today, and amazing subject. So, Project Director at Ruutu, we were recently acquired by Havwoods Group. We are carpet tiles, carpet plank manufacturer, and alongside that, I also represent their Plus Floor brand, which is LVTs and vinyls.
Fantastic, thanks, Lincoln. And I'm going to introduce you to two wonderful designers, very well experienced within this this market and so forth. Leanne Wookey, who's the Director of Interiors at TP Bennett in Manchester, and Franky Rousell, who's the Founder and Creative Director at Jolie Studio. I'm going to hand over to Leanne and Franky now. So Leanne first, I'll let you introduce yourself and explain who you are, and then Franky after that.
Yeah, fine. Morning, everybody. So my name's Leanne Wookey. I'm the Interiors Director for our Northern Studios in Manchester and Leeds. I head up our team, so we are 50-50 of architects and interiors, working across the board of commercial properties, so workspace, residential, as well as domestic retail. We've got a full range of projects and schemes that we work on, and a range of skills as a team.
Thanks, Leanne. Franky.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Franky Rousell. I'm founder and creative director of Jolie Studio. We are a 4-year-old commercial interior design practice who also do residential, and we kind of span over all of the sectors, primarily focusing on workplace, big, large-scale residential developments, and hospitality as well. And our key focus is really, interestingly, around experience and designing for and sensory design. So I think this will be a really interesting topic that we're covering today.
That's great. Thanks, guys. So we'll go through a number of questions that we're going to ask the two of you between myself and Lincoln, and then we've got a question and answer session at the end. More than happy for people to ask questions as we're going through, and if there's relevant questions that we'll ask during the webinar as well. If not, we'll do everything at the end. If we don't get a chance to answer all the questions at the end, we are recording this session, so we'll be able to go through the questions with you, and we'll come back to you with the answers to the questions following on from that. But I'm going to hand over to Lincoln now with the first question, and really we're really looking forward to this, and let's have a great webinar.
Thanks, Phil. I think it's really important that we've got Franky and Leanne on today with their wide expertise between the two companies we've got on board today. I thought we could just jump straight in on this, and could we just, I guess, in a nutshell, explain how you define experience design, just to give the audience a kind of a kick-off into this webinar. So, Leanne, give us your start.
Yeah, no, to make sure I was off mute. Always a good start to any webinar to make sure you're off mute. So yeah, great question. So experience design for myself is literally what we do as an interior designer. It's in the bones of everything we deal with. We're dealing with human-centric design. That's more the fundamentals. So you deal with everything from it's intuitive design, it's how people interact with elements, but also, you know, it's more of a lighting. It's a sensory. Make sure you're looking at all of your senses: so light, smell, touch, comfort. There's also the other element of kind of neurodiversity and more inclusivity that has a very big impact in how you deal with that experience, is to make sure that you fully understand the space, the environment, the client, their requirements is one thing, but also how people are intending to use the environment, whether it is a workspace, hospitality or retail. As long as you understand what you're trying to get across, I think you build on the foundations of that. And as experienced designers, as both me and Franky are, being interior designers that are driven by that, it's fundamental to everything we do. So I think the inclusivity element, and I think the biggest sentence for that is more, it is human design, it's human-centric design. Everything that we come in contact with needs to be considered on every level, especially obviously COVID causing it from a, I think it's heightened quite a lot of our different senses, and we've got a lot of, there's a very big psychological element is going to be very fundamental going forward, and showing how experience design is really going to be a key driver for any client who hadn't considered it a fundamental in the past.
That's really, really interesting, Leanne. Covered a lot there. Franky, give us your overview too.
Yeah, so I think for us, and one of the key reasons why I guess there's this transition out of previous industry design that I'd had before starting Jolie Studio, where everything I felt was very much driven and geared towards aesthetics only. It was quite, interiors and seen as quite a luxurious, aesthetically driven, materialistic kind of discipline that maybe previously was viewed as kind of a nice to have. And I think for us, we identified very early on that designing in that way and being taught through universities and schools and to design in that way didn't really have any kind of tangible benefits or rationale or reason. It felt a bit all over the place. You're just picking things because they look great and not really understanding and going beneath the skin of what it is that you're actually trying to achieve from the output of that space. And so for us, having that return on an investment that people, they're spending money at the end of the day, you need to see a return on that investment. Just digging a little deeper and just looking into what is it that makes people change the way they feel was quite common sense and a little bit of an aha moment, but also something that we all experience on a day-to-day basis, whether we know it or not, is this kind of subliminal messaging that's going on telling you how you feel. And for me, experience design is a very simple alignment of function and feeling, and it's all about kind of making sure that that isn't off balance. So you've got a clear function but the feel is totally off, because that's when things can be quite jarring, and that's when people ultimately feel uneasy about a space. So experience for me is just about creating harmony between function and feeling.
That's really, really good. I think we were discussing before we kick this off what we feel, how as manufacturers and suppliers, we're probably more steered towards that kind of function side of things. So it's so important as well that we're aligned with you guys as experienced designers talking to that end user in whatever sector you're referring to specifically, that we're actually up to speed, we're looking at the right products, and we'll cover that in more detail. Phil, I'll let you jump into the next question.
Yeah, sure. So to Franky first, how do you initially promote and approach your clients regarding experience design?
Yeah, it was a real challenge at the beginning, if I'm honest, because I think the word kind of emotions and experiences feels quite frilly, and typically, our personal customer at Jolie Studio are your older generation, typically male, people who are very uncomfortable about talking about things like feelings and how, and that can be seen as a generalization, but that is the genuine reaction that we had early days, was that when we started to go beyond the function and the form of spaces and start talking about the feel, initially it's quite an uncomfortable topic to dive into. So I think approaching it is all about understanding, like I kind of alluded to before, that piece around return on investment. I think that's a real kind of pragmatic understanding of the benefits of experience design, and starting there and selling, I guess, the very real benefits of doing it this way, which ultimately, we want to always create spatial experiences that exceed expectations, but we also want to influence positive behaviours in users. And so if you could apply that to any sector, essentially, you could look at workspace, but you could also look at residential developments or hospitality, and just trying to get your clients to stop talking function and form first, but actually extracting key words from them, like, how do you want your customer to feel when they walk into this space? It's really simple. How do you want them to feel when they walk in the front door? How do you want them to feel when they transition through to the middle section? And then how do you want them to feel at the end? And the main thing for me is just explaining the tangible benefits of that process, which I guess we'll kind of cover off in further questions, but there has to be a real tangible benefit, and it has to almost fall in the kind of the science and the financial driven side of things, more than just this would be a really lovely project to work on because this is a really nice way of working. No, it has to return something. So that's kind of the key way that I always tend to approach it, talking business terms and understand what they're actually looking for as a developer or end user client.
Okay, and I can fully appreciate and understand where you're coming from with regards to male and that generation, because that's exactly where I sit. So, Leanne, what about yourself?
I guess for us, very much like as Franky is alluding to, a lot of as a company, we've been going for 100 years on our this year, and for 20 of them years, our interior design area has been a standalone interior design within that architecture base. So we've been able to have the benefit of all the experience of obviously building, and most of the time we are constructing. We have a very strong understanding of how a building is constructed. So we have an understanding of how the building can be designed from the inside out rather than the outside in. So that in itself is a very fundamental and a very big driver for myself, being an interior designer for 10 years before joining TPB. That was always the biggest challenge, was you get given this brief from a client and it's like, this is the space, can you make it work, rather than kind of how we get in. So we're fortunate in that aspect when we have that, when we're on occasion to get in early doors with the client when they're selecting a building, so that's almost half of the win, because once you get a building that you think you can almost do a due diligence on it to say, right, this is going to be functional, it's got all the right aspects that we need, not only from a sustainability point of view, from a functionality point of view, from an inclusive, but also it's like we can work with this because as we're going to design, as we research and meet with your client, your team, really understand what they want, what works for them, what lessons learned, and it helps us then to deliver that going forward. So you're kind of like building from the ground up. But the other side of that is that we always do post-occupancy interviews with our clients as well. So it's almost a way of, for us, it's then being able to demonstrate, yes, this is our portfolio of case studies of spaces where we've worked with clients and we've taken them through the journey of experience and getting them to understand the fundamentals, not just we need an office space, this is how many people we've got, these are the building regs to get it compliant for toilets, fire, etc. It's what are your team work? How does your company work? What are the foundations? How do you really understand the business, the people that are going to work there, the people that are driving our everyday using these spaces? It's understanding what works for them, because you can design with a very top level from the CEO as their overview of how they feel a space should work and what they believe the experience of the business is. But for me, we crucially take a lot of time with the very beginning of a project to understand not only the client on their brief, we take that brief, we then also engage with the steering board. So we have a board of people who can then have that conversation. That could be 4 people in a small team to 10 people in a larger one, so that we get almost top view, but who are feeding down into the teams that are working with them. And then we did a slightly more granular one, just to make sure that you are getting it from the end users, but also silly things like FM, like we can provide this amazing experience, great lighting, great materiality, but how does it get cleaned? How does it get maintained? How do we make sure that these elements are cared for so that they last as well? That experience can't be a day one, it needs to be a year 5, year 10. How does it evolve? How do we make sure all of them elements that we design in at the very beginning are fundamental? And I guess that for us is our way of almost the return of investment, as Franky's alluding to, is key. You need to be able to demonstrate to a client, yes, these are beautiful images of our case studies. These are the feedback from the client. This is what they asked for at the very beginning. We took their brief, we took all of the information, and then we repurposed that brief and gave it back, explaining how we could identify and we could design these elements. And then you take them on a journey all the way through, and then go back and see them in 12 months. How does it work? Did this work? How can you see the benefit, the benefit and the fundamentals we set out at the very beginning? Do they work? So that helps us then go back to the next client to go, so this is the journey we took on, and these are the examples, and this is almost the return they saw. So higher retention of staff, being able to work the team more. Obviously, COVID is showing a whole different range, that not only do we have that team that want to be in the workspace or going to be using their environments that we're designing. There's a lot of things and fundamentals we can bring in that now they can see the benefit of experience design and the kind of the human-centered design, because we're all feeling it. Everybody being at home is now realising and taking all the things you took for granted that were in a workspace, whether that is you work in a retail, hospitality, bar, restaurant, office space, whatever your function, whatever your role was, there's a whole different perspective now that I think will make it, from our point of view, will make it a lot easier, because it takes a lot of time to get that momentum, trying to get things like agile understandings into, and that kind of human-centered design is very difficult to demonstrate until you actually feel it. And I think that's something that's making it a lot more straightforward now. It's like, right, what can we do to make sure that it's not about just doing a Google, let's make it a fun environment, let's take meetings in a boat. It's what really works. What are these tasks or these areas you're going to need to function in your daily work, whether it's home, retail, play, all these elements need to be considered.
It's interesting, and it's good to hear that as well, that you're not just looking at the individual that's obviously paying the bill at the end of the day, which is possibly the CEO or the owner of the business. You're taking into account everybody, and I think it's even more relevant now that's been taken into account everybody else that's working at that organisation, whoever they may be it's big or small. Lincoln, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. I guess kind of connected to, or expanding on that question, I've been selling to architects and designers most of my career, feel exactly the same. And we've seen, different trends, if that's the right word to use, like agile working was quite a common phrase when I first started in the industry. And I remember architects and designers, creating a lot more collaborative zones, making them bigger, the co-working, co-living environments, that kind of thing. Just expanding on that, how do you guys see that experienced design is actually like an advance on what we used to talk about? Does that make sense? Leanne, could you pick us up on this one?
I think you're right in the sense that the experience design's always been there. It's just not being able to, it's trying to get people to understand the benefits. So I guess when it comes to trends, and I guess that when you look at agile, for instance, like it's something that when you go into Europe, it's been doing for a long time. Rise and fall sit-stand desks, like these elements are things that when you are more geared to a human-centric design, whether it is anything from physical, whether it's a product, whether it's UX design online, obviously we're coming into contact with all these different elements. There's fundamentals of understanding who your audience is, and it almost kind of tapped into that in the last question. It's not more of a trend. I think it becomes a trend, but it's the acceptance that is the way of doing. I think we've been very blinkered for a very long time, and it's something that I question quite a lot is who decided that the Monday to Friday 9 to 5 was the working week for majority of environment? It doesn't make sense. Like, what if I work better at 4 a.m. in the morning and want to be done by midday? Like, how does that? And there's quite a lot of people in our industry that I know very well who do exactly that. They get up 3-4 o'clock in the morning. It's easy, they can get all their stuff done, and then they can deal with the day, and then they can cut off by like 2 o'clock. It's not for everybody, and not everybody works that way. But I think when it comes to trends, it's more kind of once it becomes an acceptance. So this, for a long time, we couldn't get anybody to understand agile, and we had clients beforehand who was still 50-50. It was more of a one-to-one. We need a desk, they need a place that's theirs. And I understand that, because people do need, and understanding that from a human point of view, you do need an area or something to feel ownership over areas and feel like you belong. But it's how that then can be catered through. And I think it's changing them behaviours, and that understanding is a very, very key functional part of when you approach any design. I think, as Franky was saying before, interiors has always been seen as it's a commodity, it's a fluffy commodity, it's something that looks nice. I think Google opened the door to a lot of things by showing the art of the possible but what they also did, they shined a light on opening people's minds to what could be possible. Like, it doesn't need to be a desk that you sit at 9 to 5, you get up your lunch, and it's a very kind of boxy office space. But from my point of view, obviously Google for me it's something I put to one side. It opened, like I said, it opened the behavioural change opportunities. But I think from that, it's meant that we can really get into, how these spaces work, understanding fundamentals as well. So things like, making sure that we're eating well, that we're getting, plenty of rest time, that we're working in the right way, that we're exercising. These are all elements that are now part of our day to day, and that this is work and that is home have well and truly been blurred. So I feel, in a nutshell, I would say that it's opened the doors for clients to really understand and get into nitty-gritty and justify it. I guess that was justify the reasoning and the approach.
No, I think that's really, really helpful and definitely explains it. Times have moved on a lot, and things change quickly, whether it's hospitality or workplace. People are talking about resi-mercial designs, and we've got to have that open mind for each specific client space. Franky, give us your input on this one.
Yeah, I think trends are really interesting. It's always been such a fascination, I think, for so many different industries. It touches everything, right? So not just interiors, it's in every single industry. And if you just roll it back outside of our world for a second and kind of think about what a trend is and how it happens, and it's usually a kind of a reaction from something that's bigger that's going on, that's normally quite politically driven or socially driven, and we adapt and become comfortable with something deemed as a trend because we know that lots of people are doing it, because lots of people are fighting kind of this bigger cause that sits behind this rationale of why we're doing it. So before COVID, I guess we saw, I'm talking about 12 months ago, we were seeing lots of things centered around well-being, because well-being and mental health was a real kind of prevalent topic in society, and people were really talking about, we're seeing high figures talking about how you should be more open about how you're feeling and talking about it, and it starts to filter down into individual different streams and routes to market, and eventually it landed in the laps of the interior world, right? So we were thinking about how we can create more well-being in our spaces, and as Leanne alluded to, Google were a great pioneer in thinking about getting people moving more and chance encounters, and we're really the kind of first people to move outside of that rows of desks approach. I think for me, I'd already kind of identified while that whole movement was going on, it's quite a funny thing, trend, because I feel that personally and in our work, trend doesn't really hold longevity. It's not necessarily a great investment piece. Times move quickly and something else is hot and you need to keep up with it. And it just doesn't feel particularly sensible as a way to design, right? So there's so many beautiful examples of interior architecture that stood the test of time for hundreds and hundreds of years that you still walk in and you feel something. It's emotionally driven, and that's where I think our inspiration really comes from with experience design, because it's not trend based, but the benefit of the way that trends emerge and they happen. The pandemic for us actually has been a real kind of, obviously it's been an incredibly sad time, but it's been a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because it's woken everyone up to this understanding of this political shift towards people feeling a certain way in a space, right? So I think that just talking about different sectors, obviously, so workplace and home, you were talking about resi-mercial there, because of the political forces and the powers that have told us that we need to stay at home, we've had to understand that our home spaces have to work a lot harder than they ever have done before. And so we need to find really quick, nifty ways of switching up that experience to feel like we're ready for work, and then we're ready to not work, and we're ready to eat, we're ready to socialize, ready to celebrate. People are having every single life experience right now under one roof, and it's such an interesting time, I think, because our homes were never geared up to cater for that. So that's why we've probably seen a massive surge in people wanting to revamp their home spaces, for example. Sorry, dog, something came through the letterbox. It'll stop. The joys of working from home, right? Perfect example. This isn't good for our, this isn't where, that's why I genuinely think it's a good thing that we have office space, and I'm very much looking forward to going back into office space. But back to what I was talking about this kind of blend of workplace and home. We work in lots of different sectors. We work on offices and we also work on residential developments, and we are seeing a real, cross-generational use of those spaces. They have to work a lot harder. One of the biggest takeaways I think I've had from this whole experience is that, and where I see it going from now on, especially in workplace, is that it needs to have more of a kind of a private members feel. People need to feel part of something bigger. There are a lot of people who have actually really enjoyed working from home, and there are also a lot of people who have absolutely hated it. But to get people out of the comfort of their home environment, blinking back into the light and going back into those cities and going, how do we do this? How do we navigate this? There needs to be a real temptation. And I don't think that the offices that some of those businesses were catering will be tempting enough for people to go, yeah, I'm up for this. Let's go back in and let's, function how we did before. So we're seeing a lot of businesses coming to us and saying, how can we create spaces that tempt people to leave their homes and come back. And because we know the benefits of people coming together, and we know the benefits above just staying in one room at home. So it's having that kind of membership type approach where you've got exclusive set of amenities that people have got access to, and that speaks to every single sector. So that's kind of how I see, which ties perfectly into experience design, how I see kind of the trends moving from here on out, but obviously using that word very, very carefully, because I think it's something that's going to be here to stay.
That's really, really interesting way to put it. And I love the way you spoke about the basics of a trend and where it comes from. And I think what you're really highlighting is that experience design has been there, but it's advanced in certain ways because of the new era we're in. But it's even more important, especially what we've just been through, the importance of experience design. So yeah, thanks so much for all your points you covered off there. Phil, I'll let you jump into the next one.
Yeah, I mean, we've already touched on this, and it's interesting you referred to Google already, because I suppose my generation, when you look at Google and you look at what they're trying to do and have people in the workspace, are they wanting people in the workspace longer before we went into this pandemic? Is that what they're trying to encourage, to try and get people there? So I think it leads us perfectly well into it. And as well, you've already touched on it, is what part does well-being have in experience design? Franky.
Yeah, so I think I was talking a little bit, so it's really interesting that we've all kind of mentioned Google, because Google was actually a real driver for me identifying that something wasn't quite right with the way that workspaces were being designed. And the biggest thing was that, yes, Google took the movement away from something very corporate and sterile and started to inject like life and colour and crazy ideas into spaces, where we saw this shift of like people putting slides and ball pools in their offices and hammocks and throwing bright splashes of brand colour on walls, and not really thinking about, you know, that looks cool, that's more like Silicon Valley-esque, but how does that make people feel in a space? Well-being is such an interesting topic because, you know, this whole, like I was saying about political shift and movement, well-being, sustainability, social sustainability, people generally just being kinder to each other and looking after ourselves and each other is such a huge thing for the next generation. I think the older generations are really like understanding it and are all on board as well. So we're all moving in the right direction, I think. But emotional well-being is the key thing really for experience design, and you can still create a sense of well-being through Leanne alluded to like things like sit-down desks, very ergonomic kind of health, physical based well-being. But what was always missing the mark was the emotional well-being, and people didn't realize that an environment can tap into that and can support that. So we talk about things like neurodiversity, people having certain sensitivities. This isn't a small kind of pocket of society that struggle. This is everyone has a susceptibility to their environment, everyone, whether you like it or not. And we all kind of sit on this neurodiversity scale somewhere. And especially in Silicon Valley, which is such an interesting thing because they have very kind of real data and stats to suggest that a lot of their developers, they're very developer heavy industries, sit quite highly on the neurodiversity scale. They're incredibly intelligent individuals who are very, very driven. And actually those are traits that they recruit looking for. And there was a massive study that came out of Silicon Valley saying that there was a large number of population kind of functioning there who were on the autistic spectrum. And yet the environments that they were sat in was like a massive red wall, a massive green wall, massive blue, like these environments just absolutely aren't cohesive to the task at hand. And so when we talked earlier about alignment, creating alignment between function and experience, that's because when you have a misalignment, it's jarring, it kind of throws people off course, and subsequently, very subtly over time, starts to make people unwell. Building six syndrome is a very real thing. It's you can find it on NHS online, and it's about the impact that your building has on yourself. And I think we've all been in that situation where we've sat in the same desk. I know I have, before I started this business, sat in the same desk for, you know, even in my short career before that, 4 years. And starting to realise that little things around me, like the lighting, the smells, the sound, were genuinely making me really unwell. And so I think that well-being ties really perfectly into this, because obviously it's going to, if we design more experience-driven and get the alignment right, we're not talking about chilling people out. We're talking about understanding what it is you want to make somebody feel, gearing up the form of the space to do that, but then also aligning the experience and the sensory experience to do that. So that might be a nightclub where you want people to like let their hair down, but as long as it's all geared up for that, then there's no misalignment. People feel really at peace with the space. So yeah, I think it was more originally focused towards physical well-being, whereas now we're talking a lot more about emotional well-being, which I think is a really, really great thing.
That's really interesting, actually, yeah. And I think something you mentioned earlier, Leanne, as well, prior to we getting on this webinar, was, you know, your husband coming into the room. You've obviously aligned the room to where he sees it as an office, in fact, now, because of the scent you've got in there and so forth. So, which was quite interesting. But yeah, you've obviously aligned your office to what not what you think it is, but obviously your husband thinks it is.
Just to clarify, to clarify that one whole point. So, and it does tie in genuinely. I think we're both on the same plane when it comes to experience design. Is not just the physical; it is the emotional. It's the mental. We've got a lot of psychological. There's a lot of psychological papers that go behind it. There's neurodiversity. Going back to the neurodiversity, it's that. It's also that kind of inclusivity that we need to be able to put in. We have so much control over our physical environment, but also playing out being from a lighting point of view, from a scent point of view. So just to clarify the conversation we're talking about, in my office, I have my place right next to daylight, so I have natural daylight. I also have a lamp to make sure that I'm task covered. I also have the light in the room on. So my electricity bill, luckily, is all eco, so it's all sustainable energy is into this home, and they're all energy efficient bulbs. However, when we came back into our own home, I found it very difficult to get that balance of a space where, if it was quite busy or quite intense, you're in a space on your own, when normally with a team where you can battle this out or you can go through elements. And I felt that actually, when I was dealing with hospitality and design hospitality, you wouldn't just look at the way that you would design that space. You would look at how the scents and what scents, and it's really understanding that certain scents they're good for you in one sense, but it can be dangerous in others. So things like, I think in here I've got a bit of ylang ylang, palmarosa, and I didn't even know the words of these things until about 4 years ago when my friend introduced me to them. But it's more understanding that they give off a scent that's really good. It's a natural scent, but the fact that helps with your mood and controlling that, and you do that when it's something that it's not new. We haven't just started doing this. Bakeries, when you go into Tesco's and Sainsbury's, bakeries purposely designed their air conditioning units to kick out from the bakery to the front of the store, and they purposely put the bakery in a very far corner so you would smell it. That would get you excited. I really want this. Everybody loves to smell the baked fresh goods, all good, but they would put it and they would make it so that you would go and enjoy it. You'd travel through the space to get to that. So we've always played as designers and architects of experience. We've always already put them elements in, but I don't think we've ever really honed into the reason and the justification, really getting into that nitty gritty and understanding the research and insight into what works. And well-being is absolutely fundamental to everything I do from a well-being and sustainability point of view. As not only personally, but as a company, we have a driver to make sure that is at the forefront of everything that we do. As a company, from sustainability, obviously we're very fortunate to be in Manchester city centre. Manchester as a whole has got a very big strong driver for 2030 being carbon neutral. We as a company have aligned ourselves with that, and the sustainability and the well-being were always, again, they've always been part of that experience design, because you are coming in contact with them. So from a well-being, what reflective material, what pattern you put on the wall, on the floor, it has an impact on you from a neural point of view. It has you've put down in a more different soft spaces, the different uses of texture. It's so layered, I think, that when we should be designing, it isn't a cookie cutter approach. It's understanding how that can be expanded so that you are looking at every sense, because it's comfort, but also I think we're going to find that obviously at home, as we said, I've got all these within my control. When you're in an office, you don't have that control. So how do you gain that control? And we've all had them stories where the air conditioning, I sit under the air conditioner, it's freezing cold here, somebody's over there roasting, they go and push it up so it's free, and I get that bad experience. A lot of the design we're doing going forward is to make sure that individuals have control, so you have control of your environment. We have rooms and areas that you can go into so that you can have control of the environment, control of the lighting, that there's a scent that is run through the building, there's sound and how that can be controlled. Having your own control over your desk is something that was very simply put in with a task like once upon a time. So we're trying slowly but surely to give that emphasis and that control back, so that to help with your own well-being, is that if you know that you're in control of certain things, that takes the pressure out of any kind of situations. You feel like you can control elements, even the small elements that you can control. That gives back, that again works on helping that sensibility and that well-being process. I don't want to go on too long. I'm very aware that we've only here for 45 minutes. With me, I could quite happily talk all day, as anybody who knows me would definitely understand.
I think this is going to stimulate a lot of questions, a lot of there's a lot of interest, I think, and we've got, Lincoln and I have got huge interest in this ourselves, so we're learning an awful lot from this as well. But it's really good to hear, the well-being side of things. From my point of view, individuals are being cared for now as opposed to just organisations. I think that's the important thing with experience design, without a shadow of a doubt. Lincoln, over to you.
Thanks, Phil, and yeah, it's so interesting to hear you got your guys' input on that one. Emotional well-being, so important on different layers, and of all times, mental health being so critical right now. I think it's absolutely imperative that whatever walk of life we're in, we've got that at the top of our minds. And another big subject which both of you guys I know are very strong in, and you mentioned it just now, Leanne, is obviously sustainability. As manufacturers, we are very much trying to keep at the forefront of it and very much aware of the importance of it. From an experience design perspective, what's your thoughts and insights on sustainability and the importance it plays? Leanne, could you pick us up on that one?
Yeah, so sustainability is something that, again, was just a buzzword for a long time. And actually, we've seen that we're having a massive impact on our environment if we don't do something about it. Ironically, nearly 20 years ago, I wrote a paper about how when sustainability was a tiny word that had appeared and nobody knew what it was. We didn't have bins, nobody knew how we were going to deal with any. All you knew about was solar panels that went on roofs of buildings, and that was sustainability. We, as designers, have 70% control from an interiors environment. We get to deal with the furniture that comes in, how it travels, materiality it's made out of, how it's made from a sustainable resource, how it then gets returned when it gets recycled once it's gone through its life cycle, making sure that the wall finishes are not given and materials aren't given off VOCs, how we deal with that when they're, the products that we do, even as a company, we have a sustainability questionnaire that goes out to all of our suppliers and everybody we work with. Our contractors have to be on board with this as well. So this isn't just a nice tick of the box. These are fundamental to work in an environment going forward, to be able to hit credentials, for us to be forward thinking, for us to be that, for us to actually provide an environment that should have always been considered from day dot. We need to really understand that. I think for a long time, people thought that sustainability was putting in some plants and making sure that you recycled. It's on a whole other level than that. As designers, as experts in our environments, we need to be able to say quite confidently that everything we're putting forward is not only recyclable, has a life cycle that will last. So it's not a case of something that will be used. It'll be something that can be modified or fixed. So even these things are a generational thing that we used to do before. The reason we have these beautiful kind of designer pieces that are from back in the 40s, 50s, even like the 20s, 30s, is they were designed in a way that you would maintain them, you would make sure you looked after them, and you would take them forward, and they had a long life cycle. I think we got into as a society, we got into a very throwaway point of view where it was just like, we want the next new thing, and it doesn't just hit buildings, interiors, we're talking fashion, we're talking every product. We obviously went into manufacturing, became a very big deal, back in the 50s, 60s, of how we were going to, how can we best preserved things, and plastic was this new fandangled environment, and it's great in one essence because it solved one problem, but it's caused so many others. And it's taken us time as a race, as a species, to understand the impact that we're having on ourselves, but on the environment around us. And so sustainability is a fundamental for everybody. It's not just a one person on interiors, or we all should be thinking about it. You know, when you've got the mechanical engineering, how we deal with the heat and how we utilise the heating and the cooling of spaces to make sure that they're renewed through the environment, so that we can make sure that we've got the right temperature internally. There's a lot more technology. We've got smarter buildings now that are doing heat mapping, so that they can make sure that we're not overly using mechanical or electrical items to keep the space heated. We're keeping a constant so everybody's happy and comfortable from a temperature point of view based on heat mapping, but the building's not then overusing resource. We could go on. I could talk to you about sustainability until the cows come home, I'm afraid. I am a massive advocate for it. Even things like biophilia was part of it. Once upon a time, it was like, oh, pretty plants. It doesn't work like that. They take VOCs and formaldehydes out of the atmosphere. I've read NASA papers where they did it back in the 60s and then revisited it in the 80s, showing and demonstrating how plants give back more than they take. They take so much more out of the atmosphere that we just take for granted because you can't see it. So your worktops, olden days, were made with VOCs. So as you're using them, you're in contact with them, so you're then inhaling them as the desk heats up during the summer. There's so many things that you've now got. But I think, like we were saying before about experience design, once you have the data that backs up the reasoning and the justification for why you're doing something, it then is a decision rather than it's a nice to have. It's like, well, this is what you should be doing. This is what we need to achieve. These are the levels we need to be able to provide in all these different environments across all of our sectors.
It's really good, and I think what you're highlighting really is not optional for us to not consider it. Yeah. Whether it's us as manufacturers, you know, procuring the right products, producing the right products, and then it's yourselves, from your perspective, making sure we actually comply, sending out your supplier, what you mentioned earlier. I think that's really, really interesting to hear you say that, and it'd be really good to get your take on it, Franky, because I know you're very, very hot on this topic, and we see your regular updates on LinkedIn, etc. So give us your take on it.
Yeah, I feel like we could do a whole separate webinar on sustainability. It is definitely something I'm super passionate about. But I think the reason for that is it is so closely connected to everything we're talking about today about experiences. So to keep it quite short, I guess, on my side, obviously we know that this is a thing now. Sustainability is really important. People are on board. A lot of people still aren't on board, but they need to catch up because this is happening, and it's a really, really important thing that we all embrace, and it's actually being embraced by lots of people at the moment, so it's becoming quite trendy. So sustainability is cool, whereas it never used to be cool. So that again means that things start happening. So we have quite a logical way of integrating and knitting sustainability into our approach. It starts with sensory, so it starts with experience design. So we always kind of start a project thinking about what we were talking about, which is alignment of experience and function. So basically connecting human beings emotionally to a space above and beyond aesthetics. Then once we've understood the kind of fundamentals of how we want people to feel in a space, we start looking at the kind of next layer of sustainability, which we deem as social sustainability. So it's not all about, you know, the very last kind of materials or throwaway culture. It really is about attitude and building up communities. So if you design in a way that is experience driven or sensory driven, it's the kind of way that we speak about it, then you're naturally going to bind people together. You're going to create a sense of community. You're going to uplift people. You're going to make them feel empowered in spaces. Things feel a lot more tangible. They make sense. They're comfortable to be in. And we're trying to move away now from this societal shift of people being very independent, working in isolation or shopping in isolation or eating in isolation, to actually get people to come together and communicate, and that requires a level of experience-driven design to boost people's confidence, to, you know, make people feel great enough to be able to do that. So social sustainability is a huge one that I think often gets missed by understanding sustainability beyond materiality. It's all about creating movements and shifts in society, and by getting people to come together, you're not duplicating and throwing away waste. Essentially, people aren't having to redo things all the time. They can share, and that's why we're seeing so many shared amenity spaces within, you know, mixed use developments where people come together, and it has to speak to everyone, no matter where you're from or how old you are or what gender you are. It has to speak to everyone. So that's a really interesting sustainable agenda that requires experience design. And then finally, we really kind of naturally start making responsible choices in the way in which we design. So when we're actually executing that, we understand certain colours, fragrances, textures, you know, even down to soundscapes. But let's talk materials for a second. We know that we want a wood floor, but we then have to go and explore who is going to produce that wood floor in the most sustainable way. And it requires research, it requires time. And we can start to become a little bit autonomous in the way we design. We reach for the same suppliers who are absolutely nailing it on the sustainability credentials. And so that's a very kind of, it comes a little bit later on from all of this early strategy stuff that we're doing. When we actually pick the materiality, that's the next bit. And we obviously need to be looking at things like recyclability and life cycle and manufacturing processes. All of that's super important, which is why it's so important that we have really great rapport with our suppliers, so that they can educate us on this stuff. Because I've kind of explained it in this way before, but we're like the chefs. We put it all together. You guys create the ingredients, and it all stems back to that. At the end of the day, if the ingredients are of great quality, then our own product's going to feel fantastic. So that's kind of the process that we go through, and it's all very, very connected.
I think that's very, very well put, and it was good to get your touch on the social sustainability as well, because we can get very tunnel visioned about, especially myself and Phil as product kind of manufacturers. We're obsessed with the floor at the moment. We just stare at the floor everywhere we go. But there is a bigger picture. There's the human side to it, which is not just product. So I think it's really, really helpful the way you went over that as well. So thanks for your points on that, Leanne and Franky. Phil, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah, I think the next question was with regards to something that a client needs educating around, and I think we've already touched on that a lot within this whole webinar so far. So I want to refer to a few questions that have come through already, because I know we've got some great questions actually. First one being from Helen. Helen says, does experience design automatically equate with big budget, which I knew was going to come up? Are these projects costly, and does that mean only larger corporate business can afford to implement these ideas? Great question, Helen. Leanne?
No, is the straightforward answer to that. Yes, I worked for Bennett. It is seen as quite a big machine, but beforehand worked for a smaller practice, and it was still the driving part of everything that we did. Experience design doesn't need to be on massive budgets. It's the understanding of every element that client's going to come in contact with, as we've gone through from that an understanding of experience design and human-centered design. Once you understand that can be applied to everything. So whether it's small build, small office space, small bar, a restaurant, retail, it doesn't matter the size of the space or the size of the client. If you understand the fundamentals of experience design and how that knowledge can be given back to the client to empower them to feel that they can really deliver, then at the moment as well, I think the more kind of top to that is that everybody always assumes it's sustainable, and once you give it a tag or a name, that it becomes more expensive. Sustainable products, as anything that's new, they'd start off quite expensive. So it was always, as always, you go into the shops and you want to go and buy free range, organic or caged. Straight away now you see that word. All of a sudden you've got a decision that you can make, and but before we didn't understand what was the difference between this and that, what was different. And then as time's gone on, we get more and more of that information, so we can now make the most informed decision. It's exactly the same with experience design. Once we understand and you have the knowledge, that experience is then for you to give that knowledge to the client so they can see what we can achieve. And then it's our job, as Franky quite nicely put before about being the chefs, it's our jobs to curate that and make sure that it hits, whether you've got a small budget, a large budget, a small space or a large space. It doesn't matter. It's fundamental. You're still dealing, if you are dealing with a human being, or if it's personal centric, it's something that needs to be considered.
Good answer, yeah. Franky, I guess you're similar.
Yeah, Yeah, I think it's just thinking about, there's two things. I think there are products like Leanne said that are new and they're using it as a way of marking up because they know that it's hot right now, and that definitely is happening. But it's any lifestyle shift, and it's like some people say that being a vegan, for example, is a privilege because it's so expensive. Some of the products are very, very expensive that have branded themselves and positioned themselves really well in that market, and it's attractive and appealing, but there's so many raw ingredients that are still the same price that they were before, and it's just about being smart about how you use them. I think that it's also a piece around and this is really going back to clients and how we educate clients on this, about investment. And there you may invest in a non-sustainable, cheaper fit out, for example, even though I don't believe that sustainability has to mean expensive, but you may invest in something that feels more throwaway and cheap, but the long-term investment in that isn't sensible. There's no tangible return on that investment, and you just end up ripping it up and doing it again, in a few years' time. So longevity and investment's a huge part in this. And so that's why with experience driven, not just sustainability driven, but experience as the reason why you're picking products, is that it's not trend driven, it has longevity, and it's bespoke to that client. So it shouldn't age, it should age gracefully, it shouldn't age and need to be ripped out and redone again in 5 years' time.
That's great. And Helen, I hope that answers your question, but I think what I've taken out of that is, like Franky just said, each client is going to be very individual, and you're always working to a budget anyway. So that experience design will help that massively. Great answers there. Lincoln, over to you.
No, we've got another good question coming here from Veronica. I'll jump into that as well, so I think we're running a little bit up against the clock. And Veronica's question is, interior designers have a natural aptitude and years of training to understand colour and the importance to our senses, experiences. How do they manage to keep these specs? They might be dealing with a procurement team who actually is colourblind and can't see the difference. And I've got examples of where they can choose a colour, which was then switched. I.e., would be good to hear some examples of spaces that are slightly disappointing and some they're feeling are outstanding, and how the detailing made the difference. So I guess that's about, you've got different, you've gone over this in a lot of detail, how it's always specifically to each individual client, the importance of understanding the client's needs. Franky, is that something you could help us on?
Yeah, I think it's interesting about this role of interior designer and procurement manager, and it's really about, I think that's more of a process driven thing, and we tend to find that our choices and our specs don't get swapped because they've been justified early on enough that the client's so bought in that the client's on our side, and they are making sure that the vision that we've sold them at the beginning is exactly what they're going to get at the end. So there isn't an opportunity in our work cycle for anyone from procurement to come in and change that colour. And again, if it comes down to budget, there's no justification on that, because colour is something that can be executed in a space in so many different ways through so many different materials. So it's really about, I think, the importance of detailed design, making sure that all the information is there, it's in writing, and there's no opportunity really for anybody to swap it for whatever reason that may be. So it's an interesting question, and yes, colour is really important. It's one of 5 human senses. So, that's actually something that interior designers are really comfortable with understanding, although I think there's still a long way to go in understanding it more. But imagine the other 4 that people don't know how to communicate about, and there is an easy swap there, or a reluctance to even involve it anyway. So there are bigger challenges like fragrance, for example, which could easily get VE'd out or pushed to the side, but we don't let that happen. We have to stand firm, and that's all about that early stage justification. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers that question.
No, it does. That's really interesting, because you guys obviously often up against those procurement managers, trying to battle out the reasons why you've put forward what you have. Leanne, what's your experience in this?
I'm not gonna lie, there isn't much more to that. I think that was answered perfectly. The beauty of everything that you design is if you do everything we've gone through, obviously you've got the research and insight, you have the client's buy-in, there's a reason and justification. the beauty with that, and that's why as interiors, as designers, we have to, everything we do, we have to be justified. It can't be, why is that colour, I painted that colour red because I like it. That's not a justification. It has all the reasoning, all the backup, so that when it comes to them elements, when it comes in procurement, they usually have to come back to us anyway, because it can't be approved without going through the team that design team. So it's always an easy win to be able to go back and say, this is justification, this is in because of X, Y, and Z. Rather than we're looking at being the colour, it's more looking at, as we were saying before, the process. So is the materiality that it's gone in on, that needs to be something that we refine or look at. But the colour has been decided, it's been agreed based on a range of factors. So it's important. I guess that's for everybody though. It's important. If you as designers, we have to justify the reasons for everything that we do. I do remember very early doors and going to university and going, why did you put that there? Well, because I liked it. That just doesn't fly in our industry. And also when it comes back to us where people say, well, we want to take it out because it needs to be viewed. It's like, well, let's look at the whole scope, because that can't be the one element that will make the biggest saving or will make the biggest impact. That one's going to have the biggest impact on the client or on the finished product. So we need to be able to understand the reason and justification, as we had to give it for that to go in. We need the reason and justification for it to come out, and it can't be simply because it's a VE.
I think that's really interesting because it actually ties in with Helen's question about budget, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%.
And there's a reason, that budgets are set, but it doesn't have to be an expensive procedure.
Yep.
And we've got you two guys on the panel today because you've got such a wide experience across the different sectors. And we might work more in the workplace and maybe the budgets are tighter, but there is a way to go about it, and there's a reason the design's done for that reason, is what you're saying. Phil, there's one more. I think we've got time for one more question from the Q&A.
Yeah, I think so. And apologies if I pronounce his name wrong. It's Callie, as far as I'm reading it. In a cost-driven society, how do you sell an often more expensive sustainable product when the clients are so reducing of cost-driven? We find it challenging not to make people understand it, but to invest in it. Franky.
Yeah, I think that is crucial, that investment piece. And it's not enough to say, this is a really beautiful product. It's been sourced in a really fantastic way and it's going to, perform perfectly. We need to be talking beyond the spend. And why would you invest in a really amazing blazer, for example, that's a little bit more expensive because you intend on using it for many, many years? It's all about longevity. And we maybe wouldn't buy something, or certainly I don't buy things that are really trend driven, that are expensive, because I feel that isn't a sensible investment for me. And it's the same for interiors. And so in terms of people investing in higher price point sustainable materials, and some of them are because of the processes that have to go into them, and that's something we're still working on as an industry to drive those costs down or find better ways, more budget friendly ways of doing things. But I think it's about longevity and understanding that the client isn't going to have to keep redoing that space over a period of time. And longevity isn't just about wearability, it's also about trend and design and anti-trend and designing in a kind of a more experience driven emotional way rather than what looks great and feels cool.
Yeah, great answer. And yeah, Leanne, over to you.
I guess the only final bit for that is it does come down fundamentally to the life cycle of what you're putting forward. So we've had that, and it will be something we'll constantly come up against as interior designers, as architects. Everything you put forward has to have that justification. I had an example. I designed a school a very long time ago, and it was the first time I ever came up against it, where it was like, you were given this as your budget, and the next minute it was like, well, actually cost of bricks have gone up, so the contractor needs to be able to take some. And I remember having that actual sentence said to me, the cost of bricks have gone up, so we need to take money out of your budget. We've seen that you've got like these chairs are all in, and they were literally £65 for a chair, but this chair had a 25-year life cycle. We'd done the research, we travelled to Europe to go and see the products to make sure that everything we were putting forward was fully consistent, fully compliant, had all of the justification and the reasoning and the practicality for what it needed to be in there, the function as well as the form. And it came down to be like, I was like, well, it's only £65. And they're like, yeah, but it's times by X amount. And I was like, But the problem is you will put that in and you will cost the client an onward going cost of 10 times what we are proposing right now. So this isn't the element that we need to review. The elements that are in are fundamental. They should always be protected because we have a life cycle. They have an understanding of the longevity they're going to be in there. So they would say, oh, we can get a chair for £12. And I was like, yes, and you will replace it more times than what the cost of this single chair that has a 25-year guarantee. So if you can take that information back to the client and they will make the decision, then that is something that then gets taken out of our hands. But for us, it will always be that we want to propose something that is intuitive, is functional, is considered, is human-centered. It has a whole range of reasons or justifications for why it's there. And that for us is that way of going back and just saying, these are all the reasons of justification. That then needs to come back the other way, really, to be able to say, right, well, we need to take that out.
Yeah, I mean, qualification and education is exactly what you guys are doing all the time.
Yeah.
Hence the reason why you have the experience you have and why you're being employed to do what you're doing at the end of the day. And that's the whole idea of experience design, I guess. Lincoln, I'm going to let you wrap up. We're 11 o'clock, or 12:01, so we're 1 minute over, which I didn't think was too bad, considering how we've got on with this subject. And I'm pretty sure we could go on for another couple of hours quite easily. So, but it's been great.
Thanks, Phil. I was going to say exactly the same thing. I think experience design, amazing subject, so current and important right now. And we touched on well-being, we touched on sustainability, which are equally as big themes and subjects and important. So we really appreciate you guys touching on those, and really appreciate your time today. I know Franky and Leanne both have very busy agendas, and we do appreciate you coming on board. Great to have both your companies represented, and your input across the board on this subject has been so helpful. We will be recording it and sending the recording around to all people that subscribed and attendees. Thank you so much for those that attended, and the questions we haven't had a chance to answer, we will also answer on the recording that will follow up from this call. So thanks again, Franky, Leanne and Phil, and thanks again to the attendees, and we look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you
For having me.
You too.